And tell me, where do you land on what's your sort of method in approaching gospel differences?
Well, I'd like to just mention also that when people talk about the differences among the Gospels, they could mean a number of different things or
Mm,
types of things. They could, very often, what they mean is certain things are in one Gospel or in a couple Gospels, but not found in another Gospel. So only Matthew and Luke give a narration of the virginal conception and birth of Jesus. The virgin birth is not mentioned in Mark or John. That's a difference. Is that a contradiction? No. However, many people will argue if the virgin birth happened, wouldn't Mark have it in there? Wouldn't John have it in there? So these kinds of objections often arise not from any even possible contradiction, but simply silence,
mm,
or the fact things are not mentioned in one text, but they're mentioned in another text. So we need to be clear about those kinds of differences and think through, what would be significant omissions and what would not count as a significant or sort of informative omission where we'd say, this author really doesn't believe that.
right, right.
You can't just assume that because he doesn't mention it, that he would deny it or that he even didn't know about it. He may have omitted it because it's already been told. There's a lot of possibilities. So
Yeah.
he just didn't have room on his scroll. And that leads me to the other category of differences, which is the one that you're talking about, where there appear to be statements in the Gospels that conflict with one another. They seem to be in conflict. They seem to be difficult to harmonize, or at least potentially difficult to harmonize. And these are often perceived as being contradictions in the Gospels. And of course, usually what we're talking about is one Gospel text allegedly contradicting a text in a different Gospel. So something in Matthew contradicting something in John, or whatever it might be. Presumably there are places where people have alleged contradictions within the writing of the same author in the same book. So to stray outside the Gospels for just a minute, many people allege that there are contradictions in Luke's own narratives of the three accounts that are found in the book of Acts of Paul's conversion, of Paul's encounter with Christ on the road to Damascus. So apparently Luke can't even keep the story straight, from chapter 9 to chapter 22 to chapter 26. And I think that's unlikely, and we need to pay a little bit closer attention if it's the same author, and especially if it's in the same book. But usually, of course, we're talking about alleged contradictions among the Gospels. And the approach that I take to this is as somebody who just wants to get at the truth, not with any kind of a theological axe to grind. I want to consider various possible answers or solutions or explanations for why there is this apparent discrepancy, and be open to various possibilities. It could be and when we talk about explanations, we're not necessarily talking about resolutions, but what we might, but we may also be talking about simply, why do we have these accounts that don't come out the same? Why is Jesus being quoted in different ways in one gospel than in another gospel in what is apparently the same incident? So unless Jesus repeated himself in two different ways, that would, not getting the exact transcript of what Jesus said in many of these places. So there are a number of things that we have to consider. We have to consider the possibility that one author has a different source than another author for the same story or for the same saying of Jesus. We have to consider the possibility that the authors are dealing with the fact that they're translating what Jesus said into a different language than what he originally spoke. Jesus probably spoke in Aramaic on most occasions, and the Gospels are, with very rare exceptions, quoting Jesus in Greek. Now, when they quote him in Aramaic, I take it that they're giving something very close to an exact quotation, verbatim quotation of what Jesus said, that it was so memorable that they remembered exactly what Jesus said in his original language, and they kept that wording and preserved that. But when they're quoting him in Greek, all bets are off as far as getting the exact words of Jesus, because
Yeah.
Jesus probably wasn't speaking in Greek. So we have the translation issue. We have different sources. It could be that an author, in some cases, decides that his readers won't understand a literal translation of what Jesus said, as well as a slight paraphrase. And we need to be cautious here and not overdo this paraphrase thing, so that, Jesus is saying one thing, Matthew is making Jesus say something entirely different just because he thinks his readers will like it better or something. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, for example, one alleged discrepancy in the Sermon on the Mount is that in Matthew and Luke, the description of what happens to the house built on the sand is different. The verbiage is a little bit different there as to the sort of the topographical description of what happens on the land with the water and everything. It's a bit different. And one explanation that's been offered is that Luke has paraphrased what Jesus said, so that his Greek readers who are not familiar with the land of Israel and the way the streams worked and so forth will get an imagery that's approximately what Jesus is trying to convey, but in terms that they'll understand. Now, that's a paraphrase. It's not substantially changing even the imagery. It's just adapting the imagery so it's a little bit clearer for his listeners. If you think that that's an acceptable explanation, it's of course implies that what we have in Matthew in this particular instance is closer to an exact translation of what Jesus said. So we have to consider these kinds of possibilities.
Hi there, my name is Kurt Jiris. I'm an evangelical theologian, and I've come to realize that Bart Ehrman is correct.